So, hola, gracias. It's me, Jaws Blake, Painterfiles host. So we're in the middle of this cup epidemic, and it's crazy, honestly. Like, it doesn't even remotely make sense, like, the way all this is going. I'm seeing kind of this new resurgence of, like, craziness that I haven't seen in a really long time since I was a kid. And it's, it weighs a lot, honestly. It weighs a lot on me when I see it. When I think of Ahmaud and I think of all these other young individuals young black people really, who've fallen recently. They've been murdered by these insanely racist white supremacist folks. And I kept telling all my Patreons that I was going to tell a Painterfiles story for this one. But I think instead I'm going to tell you a story of what happened to me when I was a little boy. Now, not a lot of people know this story. I've told it to a few people in my life, but not a lot of people know this. So, when I was a young kid in North Carolina, I desperately wanted to be friends with these, like, little country rock white kids, I guess. I was probably maybe in 3rd grade or so. And I thought it was going to be, like, super cool, and we were going to be best buddies. They did not want to have me as a friend. I was hit with quite a few racist things being said. And eventually, like all things happen with me at the time, and still probably to this day, there was a fight. So it's me fighting these 4 kids. These 4 little white kids with spiky hair, Zach Morris, bleach blonde type of thing going on. And we're getting in fight, we're fighting, and we're in, we start to kind of argue and fight, and so we're talking, and the talking goes to name calling, and then the name calling starts to go where we're walking and we're talking, and they tell me I'm not welcome there anymore. And this is at an after school camp, and I remember being really kind of hurt and offended by it. And then, to my surprise, one of them took a swing at me. One tried to shove me into the other one. And then, luckily I had my book bag on as a kid, because, you just walk around with your book bag. And I turned my back and pulled my book bag in front of me, and the kid punched my book bag. So he's down, and I start fighting the other 3. And we're fighting. And they're yelling all these type of racial epithets at me and whatnot. And I'm getting my licks in, to be completely honest. Like, I will say this. My mom had me learn, like, Taekwondo. And then later I learned, like, Jeet-Kune-Do and a bunch of other stuff. So I've never been short on being able to defend myself. And so luckily, that was kind of one of those things that happened. And I was this little kind of, like, Afro... light-skinned, Afro-Latino kid, and we went at it. And eventually, it's 4 against 1, so I'm starting to kind of get tired, and these kids are taking turns coming at me, so as I'm deflecting and getting them, I'm just slowly kind of running out of energy. And I've got this little kid book bag on, which, is full of a good 10 pounds worth of stuff. So they start chasing me. I think one of them grabs, like, a big stick and starts running at me. And I feel like I kicked the stick, maybe, or something of that nature. And at that point, that's when I realized, I was like, all right, there's too many of them. I need to run. So I run into the woods. And they're chasing me. And we're kind of bouncing in between trees and pushing and shoving. And they're bouncing off of trees and all that stuff. And I'm catching, like, a punch here or a kick here in the back, in the leg, side of the face, something of this nature. And I'm starting to kind of get nervous because I don't think they're spitting at me and stuff like that. And I don't think, like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So I get to the woods, I get to this little kind of spot where they're seems to be kind of a cluster of trees. And I take my book bag off and I swing it around me like a helicopter, I guess. And they jump back. And as they jump back, I bolt in between them and I run all the way back. It felt like a mile back to the camp, or the after-school camp. It's a summer camp that pretty much turned into an after-school place. And so I get all the way back to the camp. They're behind me. I run into the administration office, and for some reason you're a kid, so you don't think about it. I didn't want to seem like I was a loser, so I didn't tell anyone. I just, speed walked like those old people in the mall, and ended up beside one of the administrators, and I just kind of sat down and just kind of cried. And she asked me what was wrong, and I didn't really say anything, and she just kind of shrugged. And I mean, it's the Carolinas in the 80s, so they don't really care what the little black kid's deal is. So they don't want anybody fighting because they don't want to get in trouble. But it was one of those things where, like, it was probably the first time I'd really experienced like racism in my life. And it was, I think really the weirdest thing was, like, the first times I ever really actually experienced true racism was when I was in elementary school. Like, I had grown up in Maryland and DC, and then we moved down there, and suddenly, it wasn't, I'd never even heard the word nigger. And I'd heard rap music and stuff like that. My cousin would play, and like NWA would be playing, or something of that nature. But I'd never heard it in a hostile way. I'd always heard it just as kind of like a song lyric, and it was really devastating. Like, it cut super deep, and it was overwhelming because it was 4 people all of a sudden at once. And I never understood that when I was that age. Like, I was just kind of, kids are kids. There are kids that look like me and kids that don't look like me, and girls and boys and older girls and older boys, and mommies and daddies, and grandmas and grandpas, abuelas and abuelitas. And it was just, it was completely just kind of overwhelming. And when I saw the video of what happened to Ahmaud, it hit me like a huge flashback. Because, like, the man was just jogging. And these people kind of cruised over, went around him, cut him off, pulled out their guns, and murdered him. And it was just one of those horrible instances where you realize, like, had the world had not seen the video, nothing would have been done about it. They probably would have criminalized him in his death and all these things. And it's really devastating, because you start to kind of realize that, like, people don't want to care about other people. They should, but they don't. And they like to, a lot of people like to pretend like racism isn't a thing, because they've never experienced it. Because in their lifespan of, maybe they're Irish Catholic, and the only people they've ever hung out around are Irish Catholics. And so they don't know what other races have to deal with, because they've never seen it. And they've never said it, so they, if they don't do it and they don't believe it, then it must not be a thing. And I remember the first time I told that story to someone, I was probably in my 20s, and they said, if you look for racism in everything, you'll see it. And I remember just looking at them and even saying, even then at that time, in my crazy hostile youth, it feels like you're just trying not to see it, though. Like, you seem to be living this life where you feel like nothing happens if you haven't experienced it or seen it or lived it or whatever. And it's insane. It's just insane. I don't pretend to have solutions for how to fix this world. I live in this world. I'm one of the many victims of people who've been attacked and yelled at and spit upon, and had people urinate on their stuff when they put their book bag somewhere, and they came back hours upon hours later and found that a whole locker room was destroyed and your stuff was vandalized particularly badly. And people, didn't think anything about it. And you're the only kid of color on the team. Like, I've lived that life. So I understand it, and it sucks. It really does. We should be luckier than this. The children who come next shouldn't have to deal with this shit. And it drives me insane, and it breaks me a little bit. But all I can do is ask that you listen to my words and you learn from my experience. That's really it. I think the biggest crime most people have when they hear something horrible happen to someone else is they try and then give them a life lesson, when really they should just listen. So, to all the little boys and girls out there, and men and women out there who experience any form of racism or discrimination or anything of that nature, believe them. Listen to them, and if you can, help them. You can't fix every problem, but you can make sure it doesn't continue. All right, my galeras. Painter out. Ciao.